I think there are two considerations that were articulated in this NCSC rationale. There's the outright security one, where they go, now that they're having to source chips from more obscure places,
potentially,
we lack the ability to be confident that we can assess these new chips.
Yeah.
And I think I haven't got a problem with that rationale. The second one is security
apparently
of supply.
Neither is Huawei, apparently, according to Ian Levy, who wrote that blog. He said his conclusions are pretty much agreed with by Huawei.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and Huawei tried to get around it by saying we've stockpiled stuff and we're good for a while. And they even said we'll make a special concession for Vodafone and BT and keep a whole warehouse
which is a dodgy argument in itself. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yes, okay. Hello and welcome to our second podcast back in the studio. Gosh, it's exciting. And we've got the usual suspects. We're doing this on a Thursday because Jamie's going to Wales this weekend, so we're doing a little bit early. Getting straight into it, what we're going to chat about. So this might be, we're probably going to have to head off with Huawei again, but this might be the last week we have to do that. We'll see. So because we've finally had some momentous news. What was that?
Doubt it,
yes. Well,
once they get banned in Germany and Italy as well or whatever, then we'll be talking about that.
Well, yes. But it's certainly a sort of inflection point in the Huawei UK narrative. So we'll start off with that. Then we're going to do, Jamie wrote a story that Samsung reckons it's got 6G nailed. And we're going to talk about that and whether we actually care about 6G at all. And then we're going to finish off a story I was writing about today. It's a bit sort of technical and arcane, but it's very important to do with data privacy, especially with internet giants. What happens to your data when you stick it on a platform owned by an American company? So that's that. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the website or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and loads of other platforms. We haven't got any beers this week. That was just a one-off. Thanks for that.
I have got something, actually.
Oh, you got? All right, you kept that quiet.
They're not beers, though. They're not beers.
Oh, what if you brought in some?
I was going to say they'd be lukewarm by now.
Brownies.
You brought in some chocolate brownies. Oh, that was your lunch, wasn't it?
Homemade chocolate brownies. No, I didn't know.
Homemade chocolate brownies.
They're
no one's got a glass of water.
They're all
except
different
me.
shapes because they're sort of broken up a bit on transport. But
you're really selling it to me, mate.
Well, they're good. They're not made by me. I should hasten to point out.
Who were they made by?
My wife.
Okay, right. Well, I better not be rude about them then.
So,
okay. Well, thanks for that, mate. I might not actually chew on it while I'm talking, if that's all right.
Well, I think you should.
Right. Sorry.
Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of having food during the podcast.
I want to fully appreciate their magnificence.
Thank you.
There you
Jamie's
go,
always up for a brownie.
all at once.
I'll have the
thank you.
Slightly scabby-looking one. It's part of an edge that's falling apart, I think.
You've totally thrown me off now with your brownie talk. Oh, yeah, so we're just getting
better
on with
than Huawei.
Yes, Huawei. I wonder if they bake brownies in their spare time. Not this week, I suspect.
They might be taking it up. They might have a bit of spare time on their hands, I suspect, after this week.
So, I'll head it off. So basically, we finally got this announcement. So we announced at the start of the year that Huawei Gear could play a part in UK networks, but only in the RAN as opposed to the core, and only 35% market share. And that, at the time, I certainly editorialised it as like fair enough, because our boffins had a look, and they reckoned even if Xi Jinping's popping around Huawei HQ every day to ask them what the Brits are up to, they reckoned they had the expertise to protect us from any potential security vulnerabilities in Huawei kit, which, it should be stressed, Huawei always insists don't exist. And then that was 6 months ago. Obviously, quite a lot has happened in the intervening 6 months. A lot of it to do with China. Incidentally, on a political basis, we've obviously got coronavirus, which, incidentally, I don't know if Pierre can catch the full magnificence of my T-shirt here, but I think this expresses how I certainly feel about coronavirus, and so presumably does Metallica. So we had that, and that originated in China, and that led to argy-bargy, and then we got things like Hong Kong, where China's not being very nice to the Hong Kong people, and that's leading to that's an understatement laugh. He said, spitting out bits of brownie across the studio. But more importantly than that, in May, the US decided to, and I'm sure we must have chatted about this at the time, to come up with this new rule that says Huawei can't buy any kit that's got US intellectual property in it, basically, which primarily affected semiconductors. So the chips that you get in not just phones, but obviously networking gear as well. And that, it seems, precipitated this review by our security boffins on whether their ruling in January still applies. And earlier on this week, they concluded that it doesn't, that because of this US move in May, they can no longer be sure of two things. One, that Huawei will even be able to continue supplying kits for the lifetime of contracts into the sort of mid and long-term future. And two, they said that we no longer have confidence that we can. I know all the foam's properly falling off the walls. Well, it's just got rubbish little double-sided sticky tape on it. It's just a poor effort. Anyway, our security people said, look, with this new stuff, with Huawei having to go off and source chips from random third parties or maybe even make them themselves, that they won't be able to. They can't provide the assurances that they did in January because of this US decision. And before I ask you, because I know you covered it as well, Ian, my conclusion about that, having read the rationale, was, and I was ready when I was writing it, my headline, which is terrible, any aspiring journalist shouldn't write their headline first, but my headline was
I don't know, sometimes it focuses your thoughts on the actual story.
It does, but then you can end up, if you're not disciplined, you can end up selectively chasing facts to justify your headline. Anyway,
well, no, it depends if you thought of the story before.
Yeah, you structure it and then come.
Okay, well, let's see how it applies to this one. So I'd written the headline, basically saying that it was a bit of a fudge and it was sort of unconvincing rationale, and it was just basically a cover for a political decision, which I still believe might be true. But then when I actually read the rationale, I had to change my headline to say that it makes sense, because it does seem plausible to me that. So basically, the question they had to answer is how come it was all right in January and it's not all right now?
Yeah.
That's the long and short of it.
Yeah.
And the reason it's all right in January,
which I think is the thing that's been missed by some of the mainstream press, maybe,
right,
covering it in the UK, as it's very much a UK story. It was even dominating BBC headlines for over a day, I think.
Yeah, or Jamie, you were on the BBC, weren't you?
Jamie was on the
Kept
BBC
that quiet,
talking about it. So, but the mainstream opinion, and I think even the Spectator had written an opinion piece on it in the last few hours that I read, was very much that it's about, it's almost like they haven't recognised the change since January and they just see it as caving into Trump.
Yes.
And I think there's an element of that, definitely. And I've no doubt in my mind that I don't know that people like Mike Pence is it, and, Trump's other lieutenants have been coming around continuing to put pressure on the UK to do what it wants. But I'm sure that's happened. Pompeo.
Yeah.
Pence
doesn't really do anything, does he?
Pompeo, sorry. Yeah. But I think that's an element of it. But then obviously there was this big move by the US that we've talked about a few times before earlier, back in May, not that long ago, to tighten up those sanctions against Huawei and basically prevent it from using, before it was not able to get semiconductors directly from US, component makers made on US soil, it turned out, because they found loopholes that allowed them to keep being supplied from offshore facilities. And now it's all about, you can't get semiconductors that are made with US manufacturing equipment or design tools, basically, which is a much bigger deal because it affects companies like TSMC and, it's a big supplier to Huawei, and it seems
to what about people like Applied Materials who produce a lot of the kit that you find in fabs?
And that's one of the problems, as I understand it, looking into it, is that the likes of TSMC and then even SMIC, which is a kind of Chinese alternative to TSMC, although apparently not quite as capable. But those big foundries all seem to be heavily reliant on US manufacturing equipment, which either comes from Applied Materials, Lam Research, or Teradyne, as far as I'm aware. There aren't really very many alternatives to that. The other issue is that there's something called electronic design automation software that's used when you're actually sort of setting out the layout of the chips. Yep. And that's really important as well. Huawei uses that, but the people that are sort of actually making the chips use it too. And that all seems to come from 3 US companies as well. I think Cadence, Synopsys, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head. I think it's German, but it's still kind of mainly based. Its headquarters are still in California. So, And Huawei's, not made any secret of the fact that those are difficult things to get around. It's gone on about, survival's the main focus, and they've been quite dramatic about it, and they've not actually been able to provide an immediate response. It's obviously a difficult thing for them to deal with. You talk to analysts, they're saying they could run out of components in a year and be in a really difficult situation. So the UK decision partly reflects the fact that Huawei could become a much less viable supplier of equipment in the next year. Now, there's an argument about whether they should be taking a decision over that. Is that really a security issue?
Yeah, I'd like to bring that up because we were arguing the toss a minute ago.
Yeah.
So to frame that debate, I think there are two considerations that were articulated in this NCSC rationale. There's the outright security one, where they go, now that they're having to source chips from more obscure places,
potentially,
we lack the ability to be confident that we can assess these new chips.
Yeah.
And I think I haven't got a problem with that rationale. The second one is security of supply.
Apparently, neither is Huawei, according to Ian Levy, who wrote that blog. He said his conclusions are pretty much agreed with by Huawei.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, and Huawei's tried to get around it by saying we've stockpiled stuff and we're good for a while. And they even said we'll make a special concession for Vodafone and BT and keep a whole warehouse
which is a dodgy argument in itself. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yes, okay, good. But the security supply one I push back on just because they're saying that we should ban Huawei because we can't be sure that Huawei will be able to keep supplying operators. Now, my view is that's not a domain of the government. Outright security and the role of this Huawei centre to oversee security is the role of the state. But, if you're one of the 4 MNOs in the UK and you hear that Huawei will no longer be able to supply you within a couple of years, then you make a business decision on that basis. You don't have to wait for the government to make that decision for you. So my feeling is that latter one is overreach on the part of the state, but you're not necessarily...
Maybe it is, because you'd think that the operators would be sensible enough to know, as people who run that business and have expertise, that if this company isn't going to be viable, they're going to have to switch to other companies anyway. Therefore, the UK telecom networks are going to be safe. I guess where the regulator gets involved is it feels nowadays, 5G's, it's talked about in terms that it's economically game-changing, and we're all a lot more dependent on broadband and mobile services than we ever were, especially with coronavirus. So I guess they feel they need to get involved because it's
that strategic resource thing, which is
you
made the comparison with something like water or another sort of vital utility.
Yeah, but although if it was a water company, then presumably they'd have the intelligence to work out that they need to
if there was some Chinese supplier that had run out of pipes.
So it's a difficult one, but I can see why they want to get involved for that reason. But we definitely both agree that on the basis of no longer feeling confident that they can assure the security of Huawei kit, that's so I think I ended up concluding, because I not only analysed that, but I also had a look with a little bit of help from our Chinese correspondent, our China correspondents, I should say, not Chinese, at the Chinese response. Although he is Chinese.
Yes, I know. I know, it's just, if you say China correspondent, that's a journalistic thing. If you say Chinese, you're just describing him.
No,
which is, so I was trying to be professional. Just help me out here, mate. It's a struggle. But he obviously helped me with the Chinese press response.
So I wasn't aware of much of what the press was.
Well, no,
so it was ambassador sort of making a fuss about it.
It was quite muted. The sort of mainstream stuff as manifested through Xinhua and Global Times, I think it is.
Yeah.
Pretty much just focused on Huawei's response, which is that this is going to set us back. We're going to be shit at 5G as a result of this.
Right.
And basically the UK shooting itself in the foot. Which is fine. Obviously it's one-sided because it doesn't fully represent the difficult choice we made between what is undoubtedly an industrial setback, excluding arguably the leading supplier of this type of stuff, is obviously a setback.
Yeah.
However good a job Ericsson and Nokia and maybe even other people like Samsung do of filling the gap. But obviously when,
I don't think Samsung can really fill the gap.
No,
I think it's more or less ruled out.
Yeah, we chatted about that last week, didn't we? Like they're not really There's no legacy stuff going on
That's
there.
the problem, yeah.
So yes, they didn't represent that, but I thought, okay, that's fine. And then there was one other, I forget the name of it. There's another Chinese paper which I'm assured is more tabloidy and more nationalistic and a bit more shrill, which started talking about how China's got to inflict pain.
China Daily.
Maybe that's it.
China Daily is
or
pretty
People's
nationalist, I
Daily
think.
or
Right.
something like that. There's a lot of people's stuff.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much the people own in China. Haven't they done well?
Any totalitarian state always has
they
a
like a bit of
paper.
people's. Yeah. It's like North Korea is like the People's Republic of Korea or something.
Or as
isn't it?
democratic in the name of the country.
Yes, exactly. They protest too much. They got a bit more shrill and said how China's got to inflict pain on the UK and make us suffer for our impudence and all this very haughty, chest-beating, authoritarian stuff. But even they, at the end of it, are going, but let's not get too carried away, because once the dust settled and we got over this Hong Kong stuff and the UK realises they don't really care about Hong Kong, which seems to be what China's assuming we're going to do, which I hope we don't, obviously, then we've still got to do business with them. So my point is I thought there'd be more fire and brimstone and wrathful stuff and vows of vengeance and all that sort of thing than there was, which I think, the reason I brought it up is I think...
Oh, they play the long game though, China.
They do play the long game, which is very, very wise of them.
Yeah.
But I think on the whole, the UK state, and I don't often say this, has probably played a blinder, because the Yanks seem happy.
Yeah.
BT just sort of came out with a press release saying, do you know what?
It's not that bad.
It's not a big deal.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? It's the operators made a big deal about how difficult it. Now, I'm not saying it's not difficult to do a swap, but it's the same. If someone comes along and says they're going to destroy your house because they need to build a railway line, how much compensation do you want? You go, oh, well, this is going to be a real hassle, isn't it? It's going to, and you drive up the case. You make it out to be a problem, and the operators are just doing that. I think they probably slightly overplayed it in terms of what it will actually cost, and
especially Vodafone, which got a bit.
And I think the government
excitable.
the government did a good job of getting around that by doing two things. It's sort of the cost that BT and Vodafone together last week were coming out with was 2.6 billion at least, and potentially quite a bit more.
But 2 billion of that was Vodafone, wasn't
2 billion Vodafone, 600 million BT, which BT's already reduced to 500 million. A lot of it's to do, I think, with the time scale. If you give them 7 years potentially, then you're talking about a process in which you'd already have a natural swap happening anyway. Vodafone, interestingly, hasn't come out and gone, well, actually, now that you've given us 5 to 7, 7 years rather, we're actually now thinking it's going to cost this much. And I suspect that a lot of that's to do with the fact that they still have a lot of European businesses that are heavily reliant on Huawei.
Yes.
They don't necessarily want to downplay how difficult it is to swap it out.
Yeah.
And they're also now angling, according to the FT today, they're now angling for a sort of free tranche of spectrum in the next
Some kind of
5G award.
compensation.
So they've got a reason there to sort of make it out to be as difficult a thing to do as possible.
But the thing is about BT, and this is one of the reasons I think they're downplaying it, is that you look at what has happened over the last 3 or 4 years, and their share price has gone for if you like 2015, it was like 450, close to 500, and it's absolutely crashed to about 100 already. So there's going to be a lot of investors that are quite, a little bit sceptical, a little bit sort of like icy about the sort of the BT business itself, and probably looking for a reason to change a lot of management figures. And the last thing they want to do is put another cat in the bag and say this is going to cause absolute chaos.
Yeah.
So I think I understand why Vodafone has taken this is really bad for us because they want to discourage the decision as much as possible. But I can see why BT, from a corporate perspective, have said it's not actually that bad because they don't want to scare investors any more than they already are.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I'm curious about.
I think you should eat your brownie as well. You're the only person who hasn't eaten a brownie.
I want to wait till the end. I don't want to get my mouth all stuck up with brownie while I'm trying to talk, man. Hasn't been a problem for Jamie so far in the podcast. But Jamie, I wonder what you think. I've written before about Vodafone making a loud noise about the downside of this Huawei thing. Do you think they've got a bit of a tightrope to walk regarding it? They don't want to push back too much on security considerations, or they might seem sort of borderline unpatriotic. Do you think there's some pressure on them to at least appear to give some ground on this stuff?
Yes and no. I mean, they'll be somewhere in the middle. Vodafone said 2 billion because they're trying to discourage I think they're trying to discourage the government from going too far down this path, and it probably works because they got a 7-year window. And BT has gone, so it won't cost more than. What did he say? He said between 50 and 100 million more than their original 500 million.
Yeah, although they've changed that now to 500.
That's completely, as far as I'm concerned, that's wrong. I mean, there's absolutely no chance that, going from a 33% takeout to or 30% takeout to a 65% takeout is going to mark you up from 500 million to 600 million.
Yeah. Although now they're saying 500 million.
Yeah. Now they're saying
no
it's not going to cost at all. I think you're right in that there was equipment which was coming to the end of its life cycle during that 7-year period.
Yeah.
So they've already written that off, and they've not written that into the 500 to 600 million expense.
Yeah.
So that's how one of the other reasons BT can sort of like the difference. And I suspect Vodafone in that 2 billion still had a lot of equipment which would have not have come to the end of its natural life. So it's a write down on that equipment.
But this is the confusing thing about this, though, isn't it? That people in Huawei's camp always want to sort of make out the bill to be as much as possible. So they tend to sort of view it as just this is the actual cost of taking things out, whereas the other, we're going to bring him up again. We always end up referring to John Stroud, but he must be feeling quite good at the moment because a lot of his analysis that he's tried to do over the last few weeks is about, well, actually the incremental cost is not much more because equipment generally needs replacing every few years anyway. So, so if you have a swap that's 7 years potentially, then you're not really talking about more than you'd have to spend anyway. I mean, Christ, by the time we get to 2027, we'll be talking about 6G. Which I shouldn't bring up at this stage because that's the next topic. But,
don't steal our thunder. Yes, well, I think Samsung thinks we will. Anyway, I'm doing it now. So those are all good points. But that led me to conclude, and I don't do this easily, as I'm normally quite instinctively hostile to anything the state does, being a dirty right winger that I am. I think the state played this one pretty well. I think they seem to have placated the Americans. They seem to have placated BT and Vodafone to some extent, although Vodafone said that we're looking into it, so they might still have a bit of a
Did they say they're looking into it today?
No, yesterday.
They did yesterday.
There's a statement from them going, we want to properly get our head around it.
Right.
I don't think those are their precise words.
Something like that, though.
Something like that. And then even the Chinese aren't totally throwing their toys out the pram.
Yeah, they might be doing, though. You never know with the Chinese.
But I just think all things considered, when it had to somehow balance these three competing interests, I think it's probably done as good a job as it could.
But maybe the Chinese
I think it's done terribly.
Oh, right, go on.
I think it's got politically and strategically outmaneuvered by the US, and it's having its foreign policy dictated to it by the White House.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
So I just can't see how this is anything more than an utter failure from DCMS. They allowed Huawei to participate in the network 6 months ago, and then all of a sudden strategic and administrative hurdles have been put in place by the White House, and they've been forced into a complete U-turn. This isn't a UK decision. This isn't proactive. This is the UK having its foreign policy and its domestic telecoms policy dictated to it. So it's come out. Like you say, it's come out plus, and it's sort of maybe dampened any sort of negative response. But this shouldn't be viewed as anything more than a significant net loss.
But maybe they don't have a choice. That's the problem, though. They've been dictated to, but they're not in a position of power. If the US has the ability to go, look, we're going to put these sanctions and these restrictions on Huawei, and we can cripple them in the way that we've done with these later sort of tightening up of the rules that we've been talking about, then maybe they've just done what other European governments are going to have to do at some point, and they haven't yet done.
I completely agree with you, but I cannot see how that creates a positive situation.
No.
I mean, I think this should be marked up as an absolute loss. Well, I don't see any positive coming out of this.
So I'll stress my point is, given the situation they were in, I think they've managed the situation as well as they could have. The broader context that you talk about, I agree with. I think the US is being very overbearing. it basically forced our hand with this May decision. But I think the May decision having been made, they probably come up with the best response to it.
I don't know that, but yeah, okay, fair enough. But that's like turning around and saying, well, I broke my arm, but at least I got a really nice plaster.
No, it's not, because you have to acknowledge the situation you're in. However much
Yeah, but that's assuming that this is like the government is sort of like there's no strategists in the government trying to predict and sort of like create sort of like war scenarios and reactions over the last couple of months, because anyone could have seen this coming. I mean, they put sanctions on the supply chain like 2-3 months ago. This is something that a lot of people should have seen coming.
So do you think we were wrong with our original decision back in January?
I think I thought the decision was right at the time, and I still believe that the risk can be managed. I agree that it's becoming a lot more nuanced and a lot more difficult with the edge being pushed out with the core being pushed further and further out to the edge. But all that says to me is that instead of inhibiting certain parts of the industry and cutting down competition and cutting down technological options, look for a way to make things more secure. And one of the ways we can be more secure is if we heighten encryption. That is something that we haven't really spoken about, and governments have tried to tackle and say a limit. In the US, they're passing a new law or a new bill which has been tabled in Congress, which is going to inhibit encryption techniques. If you encrypt as much data as possible, you make it much more secure. I mean, there's no way around that. You just turn around and you say the only way to combat that is going to be scaled quantum computing, and that's years away. You break end-to-end encryption with quantum computing.
Are there downsides such as cost and or data rate from increased?
I don't think so, because it's factored in as bog standard in WhatsApp.
So why aren't we doing it then? Why aren't we doing it? I mean, if the
majority of traffic that does go across the internet, I think the last time I looked at the stats, it was something like 50-60% of the data which does travel across the public internet is encrypted. Like everything from, there's different types of encryption, like so Google doesn't use end-to-end encryption, but Facebook and WhatsApp and Microsoft Teams does. Right, and then you've got
so it's on an app-by-app basis. You're not saying on the network. You're saying each
on
app.
Yes. I mean, and that's another way that you remove responsibility as well, because telecommunications companies are predominantly hardware companies, much like Samsung, Ericsson, Nokia. All these companies are hardware companies. They like to say to themselves, "Look how great our software is. Look at all of our end-to-end automation." They're hardware companies who are playing, they're playing to be software companies. Yeah. Give the encryption off to the guys that really know what they're doing and secure the networks. But then this goes into a whole other argument, like intelligence police force can't access the data, so they can't track down paedophiles and all that.
Chat.
That's the argument that's holding back encryption. But that's
okay.
Something that hasn't been discussed.
Would you then approve of wholesale banning of Chinese apps in the West on the grounds that we couldn't be sure of the encryption, that it would be secure?
No, I wouldn't. I don't approve of banning these sorts of things anyway.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, to be perfectly honest,
in the name of security, if there's, if WeChat was really popular in the West, or obviously we've got things like TikTok. I don't know what the implications are for video sharing, but if you're saying that you shouldn't have anything to worry about saying something on WhatsApp or Signal,
would you ban smoking?
Would I ban smoking?
Would you make smoking illegal? Would you make alcohol illegal?
Certainly not. Not smoking. I'd make very few things illegal. No,
that's detrimental to you. But the government seems that's all right.
I'm a libertarian. I wouldn't ban stuff. I'm just testing your argument about encryption being a solution to the security problem.
But the thing is, like end-to-end encryption, when it's applied properly, it's the sort of point you're making there about Chinese sort of applications is slightly redundant, because the way end-to-end encryption works, not even WhatsApp can see your message.
Right.
So this is why that there's they're trying to block in through certain legislative paths, block the introduction of end-to-end encryption, because WhatsApp turns around and says, we can't help you because the software that we've designed is so good, we can't get in. It's basically an incredibly complex mathematical equation which can only be solved by a supercomputer. But because a message transmits in a fraction of a second, you've got to get in and out before it's received and the other device sort of logs that there's something dodgy going on here. So without supercomputers, it's impossible to do.
I'm sure you're right. I suspect that logic would fall foul of the but it's Chinese, so it's dodgy sort of rationale.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, if you
they can't do anything about that.
There's nothing you can do. There's at the moment technological compute power has not gone far enough that it can break end-to-end encryption, which is why you've got all these laws. So I don't understand why that hasn't been more of a factor in this debate.
Fair enough. Before I move it on in, you got any other thoughts about this week's Huawei developments?
I just wonder what comes next in Europe, I guess, really, I suppose.
Right.
And, the broader
France
issue...
France have been quite laissez-faire.
Well, but the point that you were making about the government shouldn't weigh in with a decision about something that is not, security in the way that you've just been talking about with Jamie and encryption, but actually, is this company able to carry on providing decent quality equipment, and we know where it comes from?
So that's a consideration for everyone.
The components might run out. That's something that I'm sure these people aren't stupid who work at operators. This has occurred to them. I mean, you talked to them even, when we were at MWC last year and this whole US campaign was getting going then, and people were worried about things like stockpiling and inventory in the sort of operator community. So I'm fairly sure that, companies like Deutsche Telekom and Telefonica and Telecom Italia and some of these other big European players that have used Huawei in the past are now looking at not necessarily what the government does, but do their own procurement teams think it makes sense to carry on using Huawei? As they start to roll out 5G, and it's a critical time now. Obviously, if you are going to make a decision about taking Huawei out of the network, the time to do it is between the transition between two generations, which is happening now. So I just wonder whether this is going to trigger some sort of the fact that the UK's done it, and people are seeing what BT and Vodafone are having to do, both of them being quite reliant on Huawei, whether it sort of emboldens moves in other parts of Europe, to be honest. Not necessarily at a government level even.
The other thing you've got to consider as well is that this was an incredibly important strategic blow for the US. Because of what the UK means to Huawei. It's not just, realistically, you look at the size of our network, and it's each operator has about 19,000 masts. We're a fairly densely populated island. It's not really that big a deal. There's markets out there where they could make a lot more money. Like you think of the sheer size of Germany. There's going to be each of them have got close to 40,000 masts each. It's a lot more money there. But if this is the operational heart of Western Europe for Huawei. Now, not only have you got to have they lost the business of the UK, they've now got to shift effectively, they might remain as their headquarters, but they've now effectively got to shift a lot of their business operations out of the UK, like the administrative and the operational side of things. So it's a strategic blow as well, because Huawei's HQ for Western Europe is London.
They've already got members of the British establishment bailing, haven't they?
Yeah.
Brown, the BP guy, whatever he does now.
He's pretty much quit on the day of the announcement, didn't
exactly.
he? He kind of jumped ship as he saw it going down.
Well, because people were quite rightly taking the piss. They had all these, they call them the Knights of the Huawei table, because they had all these
there was a guy from BT before as well, Mike Rake,
they're absolutely core members of the British establishment, all knighthoods, all connected up the yin-yang. And they were all on this Huawei board, and everyone was quite rightly talking about how Huawei were going, which lord should we buy today?
Yep.
Anyway, one of them's bailed. And I think he was the chairman of their sort of non-exec scenario.
He was formerly BP,
He was BP back in the day. I don't know what he what he's.
But he was out
hands-on
before.
job
He
is.
was out before the sort of deep field thing. Deep.
Yeah,
water
he quit. I can't remember what it was. There was some
Deep
personal.
water.
Deep water. Yeah.
There was a personal scandal with Brown.
I only
can't
know it from the
remember
Mark
what it was.
Wahlberg film, really.
Yeah, he
Can't remember
bailed
the
a
name
while ago,
otherwise.
but it was
Deepwater
something to
Horizon.
do
Deepwater
with
Horizon. Yeah.
something
yeah.
to do with his private life. I think I can't remember what it was, so I better not speculate because he's probably still got enough money to sue my ass.
Maybe.
So I'll leave it there. Okay. So yes, next generations. Jamie, Samsung sort of put out this white paper going. We're already thinking about 6G, and we reckon we're pretty handy at it. Can you just give us a summary of what they said?
Yeah, I mean, effectively they try to imagine what 6G actually is and the how it would be delivered. So they haven't actually said anything particularly revolutionary. You know, they turned around and said 6G is going to be faster, it's going to be lower latency, it's going to be more reliable. You know, it's going to be more energy efficient, it's going to be more spectral efficient. But you know, we're going to have to change the network. We're going to have to change the way we deliver signals. So they actually came up with some interesting ideas. Like, for instance, they said, you know, you're going to have to go into the terahertz spectrum bands to actually deliver the experience that 6G needs to be.
Does that give coronavirus?
No,
It's even worse.
it's even worse.
That's
really
the reason we need to
contagious.
get off 5G.
But then they also turned around, but they said, you know, obviously propagation is a massive issue for 5G and millimeter wave. And we're talking about, you know, millimeter wave is 28 gigahertz up. When you go into the 100 to the 1000 gigahertz, then you're going to have some major
Barely
problems.
getting around the corner, isn't it?
Yeah, but they've presented some interesting ideas. One was RIF, I can't remember what it is, the acronym stands for, but it's basically... It's effectively putting mirrors on buildings,
right?
And that'll effectively bounce signal around corners, which is fine, good idea.
Bit old school. Isn't it?
The other one was actually using sort of like reimagining how you manufacture a smartphone, so it not only acts as a user terminal for you, but also a relay station between base stations, which is actually a really, really intelligent idea.
The sort of mobile radiation gives you head cancer. People are going to love that one, aren't they?
But then there was other things, like they were talking about. Yeah, you got to like the edge needs to be built out significantly, because with, you know, such data intensive and high bandwidth, high capacity. Sort of applications, you're going to have a new compute model where less and less compute is actually on the device and more is on the cloud. But then you also need to get latency down to less than 1 millisecond. You know, there's a lot of things that need to be thought about, and it all made perfectly good sense. But my issue with the entire thing is that it's completely and utterly redundant for the moment. Like, you can have all of these wonderful white papers and all these fantastic ideas, but there is literally 0 point in it. Like, you got to say, what is the purpose of building a new G, the sixth generation of mobile technology. Now, the reason for 5G was 4G was projected to hit its speed ceiling. Like, so you need a new G so that you can deliver more data, faster data.
Yeah.
So that and you know, that only came around because the network's deployed and you actually figure out what the pain points are of 4G. So the pain points of 4G informed the creation of 5G. Now, we haven't even deployed 5G.
And everything's built on the shoulders of the previous one, just like 4G existed because mobile broadband and 3G was shit.
Yeah.
And then they made it work.
But I guess the
research
for these things goes back a long time anyway. It's like, you know, the cycle is generally sort of every 8 to 10 years. So,
and they sort of know, as Jamie was just inferring, they kind of know what they've been able to achieve from their wish list in this generation. And
but I'm just thinking 5G, the research for 5G goes back quite a long way. You know, 4G was probably just getting rolled out because the first 4G network got switched on in the UK, I think, in October 2012 by BT, EE, as it was then.
Yeah, but that's slightly misleading, because it was switched on first in the US 2 years before that.
And it was switched on in the US 2 years before. And then
so they had 2 years
T-Mobile
of
probably thought they had it
understanding.
for about
Yeah,
50
but it's
on.
still a pretty short timescale.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
we're talking about 9 years, and then they were being turned on last year for 5G. So the discussion about 5G would go back a long way,
Yeah.
and the research goes back a long way. And at first, it's all. I mean, I'm sure some of the early paths they went down turned out to be, cul-de-sacs, and this isn't going to go anywhere. And you just start making explorations. But
this is what you have to do, and this is what I worry about the sort of the land grab for 6G is that the everyone associates Gs with just making things faster. You can get your the bounce is lower. You can get the pipe is bigger. The pipe flows faster. Everything is faster, and a G doesn't have to be about speed.
Yeah,
we were talking about this before. 2G to 3G wasn't about speed. It was about the implementation of mobile broadbands.
Yeah.
And then they realised that actually 3G mobile broadband is awful. So we got to reimagine what mobile broadband is, and that's 4G.
Yeah.
And then you go, right, okay, now we've got the pain points. We got, we need the ping to be faster. We need the pipe to be wider. We need to get more, we need it to be faster flowing. There's the pain points for 5G. So that's the, so you need to build that, and I sort of worry that you said earlier, you're setting the cart before the horse.
Well, I think it's almost happened with 5G. There's an argument it's already happened because, as you say, 2G was proper mobile phone voice calls on a digital network. 3G was mobile data for the first time. Wow, that's great. 4G, actually, all 4G did was sort out the fact that 3G was pretty shit.
Yes.
It wasn't actually very good technology.
Yeah.
So a lot of people actually say 4G should be called 3G. It's almost like they just sorted it out. 5G's come along and gone, oh, let's do something even faster. And a lot of people are now saying, well, hang on a minute, are the applications there? Do we need it to be that much faster? 4G is doing pretty well, I mean, yeah, okay. We know that things like holographic calling and all these whizzy things in the future might require a lot more.
We know in 2 years' time, let's say, that application speed or download speeds are going to have to be so much higher than they are today.
Yeah.
So this is all about getting the network in. So it's a migration from 4G to 5G, which is seamless, as opposed to getting to the 4G ceiling and going, oh, wait a minute, now we need something better.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is, and yes, the flexibility needs to be built into it. But this is what my issue with talking about 6G at the moment is that no one's actually properly experienced or created products for 5G.
Yeah.
It's the idea of Uber. Like, how many people thought about Uber in 2010 when 4G was first being deployed in the US?
Yeah.
No one. A very small number of innovators, and then they created this product which has largely defined the 4G era. Now we're talking about what services, and maybe it's holograms. Maybe holograms will define the 5G era, but we don't actually know. I mean, you guys might have better ideas than this than me, but there's a lot smarter people out there who are playing with the technologies.
Even smarter than us.
Yeah, who are going to come up with ideas that we can't even comprehend at the moment. Yeah. Because everyone looks back at Uber and goes, well, that's a really obvious idea. Well, okay, if it was so obvious, why didn't you come up with it? So are we putting the cart before the horse with 6G? And the analogy I used in when I was looking at it is, you've got to be flexible enough going into, build enough flexibility into the systems and the standards to start with before you develop it any further. And it's kind of like playing golf. Now you take your tee shot and you slice it off to the right-hand side. Now, you've gone into the wooded area, but for instance, that there's a few clearings in there. You're about 150 yards from the green, so you just take your 7-iron straight out of the bag. Now, you are making that assumption without understanding the conditions that the ball is in. You know that the 7-iron can get you to the green to 150 yards, which is exactly what Samson is saying, is that we know that 6G could be this fast, and this is going to be a pain point in the future that we need faster. Well, hold on a second. You might get to the ball, and it might be plugged. or you might have to go under a tree, or you might have to run out to the side. Yeah, you
said pretending he knows anything about golf. I've played it on the computer.
There's numerous different scenarios that could be presented when you actually get to the ball, which inform your decision about what club you take out of the bag, and that's exactly what 6G should be. Once we've actually got to the ball, i.e., 3 to 4 years' time, when 5G and 5G use cases have been mass deployed, then you start to turn around and say, well, actually, do you know what the biggest pain point for us is? Our networks, we're buying so many credits to get to be carbon neutral. It's becoming ludicrously expensive. So actually, energy efficiency and lowering our electricity bills is the big consideration for the next generation.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, that entire G should be focused around how do we lower the cost? How do we make more efficient radio antenna and haulage systems and sort of devices that can actually lower the cost of transmission? Now, that could be the next G. Why not? Why? It doesn't have to be about speed.
That'd be like a sort of eco-friendly golf club, to fit it into the previous metaphor.
Yeah,
not very exciting. Great for the
made out of
environment,
bamboo or something.
It's but it's. I mean, the business consideration for 3G to 4G was that, well, mobile broadband is terrible.
Yeah.
So no one's adopting it and using it, and we're not making any money. So we need to make a technology which people actually adopt.
Yeah.
Great. The business consideration for 4G for 5G is that we've got all these massive, ridiculous services. We need to deliver more data, and we need to deliver it to them faster so they can use it and buy more data and become more dependent on the digital economy, therefore buy more unlimited tariffs.
I think it could be that. It could be something like energy efficiency, like you say. But I suppose from the community, telco community itself, they want the Gs to be... they've always 3G itself, when it came along and they started to actually push the moniker out there, if you like, because I don't ever remember 2G being sold to people as 2G.
Yeah.
Whereas 3G, you did start to see billboards going up. 3G has arrived, mobile data is here.
3
and 3 even used its name based on it. And then they've sort of carried that on from there. They want to position it as something that really attracts consumers and that maybe is going to be a revenue. So, and this is the thing, analysts have always come along and gone, or investors have come along and said, is this next G a big revenue opportunity? And and then 4G probably was, because it sorted out a lot of the problems that 3G didn't. And like you say, it gave rise to Uber, and it got that transition to data revenues rather than voice revenues happened during that period. 5G now, people are sort of raising questions about whether it's really going to do anything, and they're talking about enterprise services maybe being the big thing, but no one really knows. If 6G turns out to be energy efficiency, then important as it is, it's a bit of a sort of, it's a bit of a, from a sort of investment, can the operators really make a lot of money out of this perspective?
From a marketing point of view.
And from a marketing
But as Jamie says, it depends on the culture.
But it might be.
If by 2030 everyone's completely obsessed with tree hugging, then that maybe is the thing. A couple of things I want to say about 5G. So we've spoken plenty. 5G and then leading up to new Gs in general. I just wrote a piece that seems to be getting a lot of traffic for some reason yesterday about Verizon getting told off for misleading advertising about its 5G. And the reason it's misleading, because Verizon's got very fast 5G, but as we know, with 5G, I suppose in general, speed and sort of capacity and coverage are kind of inversely proportional, aren't they? The fatter the pipe, the higher the frequency you have to use, so the shorter the range, and thus the lower the coverage. So they've been getting in trouble for that, for basically implying that you can get it anywhere, whereas a recent OpenSignal thing showed that I think about 0.5% of its users actually have access to 5G, which is by far the lowest. So this is one problem with talking about just the mobile broadband part of the 5G triangle, is yes, it's faster, but hardly anyone can get it, so it's a bit of a waste of time.
Yeah.
And if you're going to keep following that up to 6G, surely unless they come up with a completely revolutionary technology, like a way of using wave frequencies, spectrum, that overcomes this. And I know we've got things like beamforming, which are designed to combat that. So that's one thing worth pointing out. And then there's the other two parts of the triangle. There's the There's a sort of massive machine type communication, which is arguably not anything unique to 5G at all.
No.
But then the absolute killer one, which to me has been the case for a few years, is the low latency thing.
Yeah.
And immediately you think low latency. I don't mind if I've got to wait a minute before my phone rings, but it's not about that, is it? It's about robotics and remotely controlling things, and things like autonomous vehicles. If you've got totally autonomous vehicles that are reliant on constantly pinging bits of data backwards and forwards between each other, so that they can anticipate when a car's going to steer, and you get all this Tron stuff going on. Show my age there.
That really is low latency Tron. You couldn't even see them turn around corners in Tron, could you? It's like Pac-Man.
Yeah. If you want all that to happen, then you've got a low latency. And that's the properly futuristic, interesting stuff. That's where you have got a whole new generation. It's not just fixing stuff that was wrong with the last generation or doing a bit more than the last one. It's actually totally new. But the problem the marketing people have had with that is it's very hard to sell to consumers, which is why it's a mainly industrial thing.
As I've always said, as a consumer, you could have sold gigabit LTE to me as 5G. I would have been like, yeah, it's 10 times faster. That's fine to me.
Yeah, because it's one more.
Yeah.
It's an order of magnitude
seems like 5G
more.
to me.
Yeah, quite.
Latency might come into the consumer, I suppose, with things like gaming. Some gaming applications,
well, that's
and maybe
what they've been going
holographic
for.
calls. I know it sounds far-fetched
can you
at the moment,
elaborate?
but who knows?
Can you elaborate on holographic calls?
You'll love it, mate. You'll be standing there when your daughter's grown up and living in Australia, doing a holographic call in the living room. You'll think it's great.
So wait, how does that work? I haven't heard of that yet.
Holographic calls, where you actually get the sort of person projected into your
like
living
Princess
room.
Leia in Star Wars.
We don't
Best.
know nothing about the device yet. It's just a
Oh
concept.
yeah, it's just a
conceptual
concept
stuff. I mean, but Vodafone's shown it off. They did a demo that
Pierre was
Jamie
about
and
to go
I
down
were
the
at,
shops.
where
It was actually
where
really good
It was
as well.
really good. With the
on
captain of the
stage,
England women's
yeah.
football team on stage doing keepy-uppies with a little girl.
But that could have
and
been
it
done
looked
with
like
fiber,
a ghost
right?
in the room. Huh?
You're going to do this at home, right? So you could just use fiber.
Well, okay, this is the thing. But that's a different argument.
Unless
but
it's in your
there's lots
mobile
of-
phone out on the street, it
When did-
comes out.
Yeah,
of
there's
your-
lots of
When
reasons
did we start letting
to
him
argue
talk?
about that. But it brings up, it sends it off on different tangents. doesn't it?
Sorry.
No, it's on the contrary, Pierre. It's good. It's good to have someone who's not totally sort of in the weeds the whole time perspective. So those are just a couple of things, and then 6G. So what? Certainly 6G. I don't think 5G as a fatter pipe thing is very compelling at all. At least in part because of the range.
It might
stuff
just
I
be
was talking
necessary,
about
though.
earlier.
It might not be compelling, but it might be necessary.
Well, no,
in the
but let's
future.
say you can now stream 4K video. You've still got to be in one of those rare circumstances where you've got a 5G signal in order to do it. That's
Yeah.
my point.
But it's more about capacity, isn't it, really? Like the quantity of usage on a network. Even
That's
just
the- and
everybody
efficiency.
using YouTube on the bus or whatever
Yeah.
means that you need more capacity on the network, and therefore 5G is needed to support that. So
But how much does 5G address capacity rather than?
I think it addresses
Yeah,
it
quite a
massively,
lot,
doesn't
yeah,
it? It's
yeah.
like
I think
a
they're
really
talking
efficient
like-
technology. They can do it more cost effectively.
Right, so this is
It's
all
not
in the core.
No, I don't think it's
No,
just in
no,
the
no,
core.
no, no.
It's talking about you need the extra spectrum. You
Right.
need the extra, it's a much more efficient technology to run on a cost per bit basis.
Yeah.
It's a far more efficient way of
Even over
doing
low
it.
frequency.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
it's a
fair
far more
enough.
efficient way of doing it than with 3G or 4G technologies. And as more and more devices get used, and video conferencing now is taking off, and it will carry on getting more and more. And there'll be 4K before you know it everywhere, even on people using it on phones. And there'll be gaming applications that gobble up bandwidth. They need an efficient technology just to be able to do it, profitably, basically, which is not a sale to the consumer, obviously, but it's very important if your service is going to go down because Vodafone can't support something and do it with decent profit margins, then you need a technology that can do that. But it's almost like the energy efficiency one where. Yeah, it's a harder sell because you're not going to go,
it's an infrastructure
buy 6G
efficiency thing.
because it's friendly to the environment.
Quite. Okay, I'm going to have to move it on just because I've realised that we're running out of time. What was the last thing? Oh yes. So, story I just wrote today, which is we got this thing, and I'm going to hand it over to Jamie in a sec because he's written a lot about this in the past. But the story I wrote today is basically there was a ruling about internet giants like Facebook and Google. So when we go on Facebook and we argue a toss over something or put up a picture of our kids or whatever on Facebook, that bit of data then gets shipped off to Facebook's, or can get shipped off to Facebook's servers in the States.
Yeah.
And in principle, you're like, yeah, whatever. I've already stuck up in the public domain. What do I care what we do with it? But that data's still owned by me, and I still have rights. And this Austrian guy, Max Schrems, for years has been arguing the toss, saying, well, how can I be sure that I'm getting my Austrian level, or my
name.
EU Max Schrems?
Sounds like Max Schreck. He was the guy who played Nosferatu in the old sort of vampire film.
I'm sure he gets confused for him all the time. He's argued, look, I'm not. Where are my reassurances that I'm getting as much data protection when my data gets shipped off to the States as it is in the EU? Anyway, the latest development of it is a European court has overruled a European Commission decision saying that the measures that the Americans have put in place are sufficient. It's saying they're not. So that's a victory for Schrems. But Jamie, why don't you quickly sort of recap? You've written tons of stories over the years on this.
Yeah, so it all dates back to, like, I can't remember it. I think like 2013 or something like that. There was a transatlantic mechanism called Safe Harbor, and that basically protected European data rights outside of Europe, in the US in particular. This sort of like data corridor, because data is not viewed as a right over there. They might say it is, but if you look at it from a legislative and regulatory perspective, you haven't got anywhere near the same protections in the US as you do in Europe. So basically what they found out was Safe Harbor wasn't a suitable mechanism to protect European rights. So therefore they abolished that, and it was Max Schrems who sort of like led the campaign against that, and they replaced it with something called the EU-US Privacy Shield, which was supposed to sort of retain European rights internationally, and then this builds into GDPR.
With GDPR, sorry.
It builds into GDPR, coincides with the amount similar times that they actually implemented them and going through it, and eventually there's going to be something called the European Data Protection, European Data Regulation or something like that, which is another step further beyond GDPR. So this ruling, from what I've done, sort of a very, very brief overview on it, is it effectively said that the Privacy Shield wasn't protecting European rights, it wasn't maintaining European rights in the US, so therefore should be abolished, and that removes the data corridor, the transatlantic
so they've
data
got to start
corridor.
again, basically, with all that stuff, haven't they?
Start again, or data localization. I mean, at the moment, it is illegal to transfer without these protections in place. It would be illegal for any US company to move, or any company whatsoever, to move European data out of the boundaries of the European Union. So that includes to the UK, presumably in 6 months' time when this Brexit window ends, because we will fall outside the European Union.
So we've got to come up with our own little
We'd
deal.
have to sign some sort of deal with them. Like, for instance, GDPR is extended to Japan because, as part of a trade deal, Japan agreed to implement its own version of GDPR and bring their data protection standards up. So that's been factored into a lot of European Union and sort of like Japanese trade deals or Australian trade deals, blah, 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 blah. But it's just one further a step closer to data localization.
Yes, that does seem to be because the reason, I forgot to mention this in my intro, the reason it got overturned is because of US state surveillance activity.
Yeah.
So basically they had a look at how the Americans...
Snowden and all that lot.
Yeah, and how the Americans basically play a lot faster and looser with data when it comes to just getting hold of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of a leg they got stand on when you think of that EncroChat thing where the French managed to hack a secure system in order to catch some baddies. So I think everyone does it a bit.
Yeah.
But this European court has decided the Americans do it too much for European tastes.
Well, there was all that stuff about them spying on Merkel a few years ago.
Yeah, they don't mind a bit of spying. Of course, it doesn't stop them throwing their toys out the pram when they catch the Russians or the Chinese spying or whatever. But that's always been the hypocrisy of espionage, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that they identified specifically. It wasn't just that it failed to reach a certain bureaucratic threshold. It's that they specifically identified that they can't trust American sort of CIA or whatever to not start spying on European stuff if they get half the chance. So, yes.
This is the thing that Deutsche Telekom's always sort of got on about, isn't it? When it's tried to present its own sort of cloud, public cloud offering as an alternative to the big US players, is that you can be sure with Germany's sort of strict privacy laws that your data will be stored within the EU and actually, probably within Germany, because that's where our big servers are, and that there's no chance that it's going to be on a overseas system. So they've tried to make a big deal of that, and I don't know whether it's really worked out for them in terms of growing their business, but it certainly doesn't seem to have.
It might do more and more. I've got a feeling.
Maybe it will.
I mean, we've chatted about this before when I've brought up things like censorship. In fact, it is sort of very vaguely related to this is the Twitter story today, which I'll talk about very briefly, just as an illustration of how insecure the cloud can be, which is that someone inside Twitter basically granted hackers access to individual Twitter accounts, a lot of prominent ones, including Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And they tweeted out this thing going, if you send...
West.
Oh, did Kenya
Kim
get...
Kardashian.
Oh, they got it as well, did they? Lots of blue checks. So these verified ones. I don't even know what verified means, but it's become a sort of status symbol on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm needless to say not verified. And
Well, that means you're kosher, does it, or something? No?
yeah, it means it means
use
you're
that word
legit.
I
anymore,
mean,
can
it's
you?
it's sure it's you. It's not somebody
It
else.
means you're halal.
Cut those bits out.
Yeah, they're sure it's you, whereas I could be anyone. Anyway, but and then they tweeted out these messages to everyone who's following them, which is typically millions of people, going, if you pay $1,000 of Bitcoin into this account, I'll send you back $2,000.
Right.
And some people did it, and it seems like one of the more crude
Yeah.
bits of sort of I don't know how we describe it, scamming anyway. But the reason they're able to do it is because these hackers basically got hold of the back end, the admin console of Twitter. And so the reason that's relevant to the story we were just talking about is yet another example of how, if you've got data, if you're participating in, let's say, a US platform, and most of the big internet platforms are, then and they can't even keep an eye on their own systems enough to stop this fairly crude hack happening, then that's another argument in favour of localised stuff, as Jamie was talking about, or people like T-Mobile coming up with their own thing to offer you greater protections.
Yeah, but I don't think. I mean, that doesn't really like T-Mobile wouldn't be any safer in that scenario.
Not necessarily, but they could at least say that it hasn't happened to us yet.
Yeah, but that's like saying. I mean. That's like saying that don't put your money in a bank because one of the cashiers might give the keys to the front door to a bank robber, or.
Well, but that would apply if it had happened to Lloyd's, but it hadn't happened to NatWest or whatever. Then you're going to have greater question marks about Lloyd's than NatWest.
Yeah, there was a lot of people arguing about the idea of, well, how secure is Twitter? How should they use they should have what do they call it, two-factor authentication in place now, and it's like, well,
Sorry.
I don't know. Sometimes you just can't really prevent that sort of thing. Like there's nothing Twitter can do aside from vet their employees more. I mean, there's nothing systematically wrong with the cloud there, and nothing cybersecurity. There's no cybersecurity flaw in Twitter there.
No, that was human error.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I don't think it is necessarily the best illustration of my point. Just more a illustration of, I suppose, just the fragility of the cloud in general. The other point that I focus on in my story about is Twitter is more my little bugbear of censorship, which is there was a screenshot of the console that one of these hackers shared with the Vice magazine.
Yeah.
And it showed stuff you'd expect, like a button to suspend people and a button to permanently suspend accounts. So they never erase them; they just have them in a state of permanent suspension, i.e., whatever. It's a slight sort of tricky language there. But there were another couple of buttons that said search blacklist and trending blacklist. And what they imply is if someone's on a search blacklist, it makes them harder to search for. And if they're on a trending blacklist, it implies that it massively demotes them in terms of ever appearing on a trending topic, however popular they are, which is basically what people like James O'Keefe at Project Veritas have been saying for years about shadow banning, i.e. people having their message sort of muted on social media without them knowing. Now, I don't think you need to even be as into this sort of thing as I am to realise that's quite sinister. So you could be someone, you could even be the president of the US who has his troubles with Twitter, and they could decide to shadow ban you such that fewer people saw your stuff. So then they're making arbitrary censorship decisions just based on the fact that they're the owners of the platform. So that's just another example of how precarious all this is.
Massaging the content, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They talk and they'll use sort of Orwellian terms like optimizing the conversation and stuff like that. It still always comes down to, as any subject of censorship does, is who decides. You may decide that a lot of what Trump says is objectionable, and I wouldn't even necessarily disagree. But who are you to say that? Anyway, cool. All right, I think we've done about an hour anyway. So we might as well finish on brief Scott rant. So, yes, good to be back in the studio again. Gets a bit warm though, doesn't it, this time of year?
It's a bit warm.
But yes, so we will be back in just over a week. Thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for that one.